It was supposed to be a standard luxury voyage through the East China Sea. The Oceania Riviera, a $600 million vessel, was gliding through the waters off Japan. On board were over 1,000 passengers, expecting to dock in the vibrant port of Shanghai. But on October 15, 2025, something unprecedented happened. Just 48 nautical miles from the Huangpu River, the captain received an urgent order. Turn the ship around, immediately. This was not a weather warning. It was not a mechanical failure. It was a bill. A port entry fee totaling 1.64 million US dollars was waiting for them in Shanghai. That is roughly 40 billion Vietnamese dong just to park a ship. The Riviera had no choice but to flee. It diverted north, seeking sanctuary in the port of Busan, South Korea. But this incident is not about a ruined vacation for wealthy tourists. This is the first shot in a new kind of conflict. We are witnessing the weaponization of global ports. China has drawn a line in the water, and South Korea has just become the unwilling buffer zone in a trade war that is spiraling out of control. Welcome to the era of port warfare, when Section 301 meets retaliation. To understand why a cruise ship had to run from a port, we need to look at the weapon the United States fired first. It is called Section 301. For decades, this trade act has been the favorite hammer of Washington. In early 2024, the U.S. Trade Representative reactivated a Section 301 investigation. The target was specific: China's maritime, logistics, and shipbuilding sectors. The accusation was that Beijing uses unfair non-market policies to dominate global shipping. The U.S. wanted to level the playing field. But in geopolitics, when you strike a giant, the giant strikes back. On October 14th, exactly one day before the Riviera was set to dock, Beijing's countermeasure went into effect. They call it a reciprocal counteraction. I call it a denial of access. The new regulation is surgical in its precision. It targets vessels owned by U.S. companies. It targets vessels operated by U.S. companies. It even targets ships where U.S. entities hold a 25% stake. If your ship flies the stars and stripes, you pay. If your ship was built in an American shipyard, you pay. And the price is designed to hurt. Starting in 2025, the fee is set at roughly $56 per ton. That might sound manageable until you realize these ships weigh tens of thousands of tons. For the Riviera, that math added up to over $1.6 million. But here is the terrifying part. This is just the introductory rate. The regulation includes an escalation clause. By April 17, 2028, that fee will nearly triple to $157 per ton. At that price, trade becomes mathematically impossible. China is not just taxing U.S. ships. It is effectively banning them from the world's largest factory. The current state, the exodus to Busan. While the media focused on the cruise ship because it is a flashy story, the real damage is happening in the dark. The global economy does not run on luxury liners. It runs on container ships, and they are bleeding. Let's look at the Hapag-Lloyd vessel, the Potomac Express. This is a massive container ship, vital for moving goods across the Pacific. It flies the U.S. flag. It operates on a critical trade route. When the new policy hit, the Potomac Express was en route to Ningbo, one of the busiest ports on Earth. It never made it. Facing a ruinous entry fee, it was forced to bypass China entirely. Like the Riviera, it diverted to Busan, South Korea. Maersk, the giant of global shipping, had to scramble. Their vessel, the Maersk Kinloss, also had to skip its scheduled stops in China. This is a logistical nightmare. Shipping routes are like a precise clockwork mechanism. You cannot just remove a gear without breaking the machine. When these ships divert, cargoes are delayed. Fuel consumption skyrockets. And the chaos does not stop at the water's edge. It reaches into the boardrooms of major corporations. Look at Okeanis Ecotankers. This is a major player in the energy transport sector. They saw the writing on the wall. The new Chinese rule targets companies with American leadership. So, what did they do? They decapitated their own leadership to save the business. On October 13th, just hours before the law took effect, two board members resigned, Robert Knapp and Joshua Nemser. Both are U.S. citizens. They had to step down specifically to protect the company's fleet from being blacklisted by Chinese ports. Think about the implications of that. A foreign power effectively dictated the composition of a corporate board in the West. That is the level of leverage Beijing is now exercising. Strategic analysis, the U.S.-China-Korea triangle. But where do these ships go when China closes its doors? They go to the neighbor. They go to South Korea. This brings us to the most dangerous dimension of this conflict, the Korean detour. The port of Busan is currently witnessing a strange phenomenon. It is becoming a refugee camp for American capital. U.S. ships drop their cargo in Busan. Then non-U.S. vessels pick up that cargo and shuttle it into China. This is called transshipment. On paper, it looks like a clever workaround. It avoids the direct port fees in Shanghai or Ningbo. But economically, it is a disaster. You are paying for double handling of every container. You are paying for storage fees in Korea. You are paying for the feeder vessels to take the goods the final mile. Estimates suggest this adds 15 to 20% to the cost of shipping. Who pays for that? You do. The consumer at Walmart or Target in the United States pays for that in higher prices. But the economic cost pales in comparison to the geopolitical risk. South Korea is an American military ally, but China is South Korea's largest trading partner. Seoul is trapped in an impossible position. By allowing Busan to act as a safe haven for U.S. ships, Korea is effectively undermining China's sanctions. Do we really believe Beijing will let that slide? China views this as Korea acting as a logistics shield for the United States. Historically, China has not hesitated to punish Seoul for perceived slights. Remember the THAAD missile defense crisis? When Korea installed a U.S. defense system, China devastated the Korean tourism and retail sectors overnight. Now imagine if China decides to close the loophole. Imagine a new regulation that states any cargo originating from a U.S. ship in Busan is also subject to the fee. Or worse, secondary sanctions on Korean ports themselves. If that happens, the lifeline breaks. However, China is playing a sophisticated game. They are not swinging the hammer blindly. They are using a scalpel. Let's go back to the cruise industry for a moment to see this cunning strategy in action. While the Riviera was chased away, another ship was welcomed with open arms. The Spectrum of the Seas, operated by Royal Caribbean. This is an American-owned company. By the letter of the law, it should have been fined millions. But on October 16th, it docked without paying a cent. Why? Because of Article 6 of the new policy, the exemption clause. The Spectrum of the Seas was carrying 95% Chinese passengers. It serves the domestic Chinese tourism market. China granted it a waiver because hurting that ship would hurt Chinese consumers. This reveals the core truth of Beijing's strategy. They will hurt American interests only when it does not damage their own economy. They are dividing the opposition. They are telling global companies that if you serve China, you are safe. But if you serve America, you are a target. This creates a split within the business community itself. Companies will start lobbying Washington to drop the Section 301 investigation, not because they love China, but because they want to survive. No real winners. So where is this heading? If we look at the timeline, the future is bleak. The fee escalation schedule is a ticking clock. Right now, at $56 a ton, large corporations can perhaps absorb the pain or use transshipment. But in 2028, when it hits $157, the game is over. That is a prohibitive cost. It effectively creates a maritime decoupling. U.S. ships will simply stop going to China. We are looking at the potential end of direct maritime trade between the world's two largest economies. The fallout will be felt on the U.S. West Coast. Ports like Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Oakland are already seeing a dramatic drop in Chinese vessel traffic. Data indicates a drop of over 70% in Chinese-built ships docking at some U.S. terminals since the investigation began. This means fewer jobs for American longshoremen. This means less revenue for American logistics firms. And it means a more fragile supply chain for American factories. What we are witnessing is the dismantling of the globalization era. For 30 years, we believed that trade would prevent war. The theory was that if countries traded together, they would not fight. That theory is dead. Now trade is the war. Ports are the trenches. And ships are the ammunition. The U.S. Section 301 investigation was meant to protect American industry. But in a globalized web, you cannot pull one thread without shaking the whole structure. The diversion of the Riviera to Busan is a warning. It is a warning that the Pacific Ocean is becoming a divided sea. On one side, the U.S. and its allies trying to maintain the old order. On the other, a rising China rewriting the rules of access. And in the middle, caught in the crossfire, are nations like South Korea. They are forcing the world to choose sides, one shipping container at a time. There are no real winners here. The U.S. shipping industry loses access to the world's biggest market. Chinese exporters lose easy access to American buyers. Korean ports gain temporary volume, but face existential political risk. And the global consumer pays the bill for all of it. This is not just a trade dispute. It is a reshaping of the global map. And the scary part is, we are only in the first phase. As the fees rise and the tensions mount, the next step might not be a fee. It might be a blockade. The waters of the Pacific are getting rougher. And for ships like the Riviera and the Potomac Express, there may be no safe harbor left to run to.